The morning air was heavy with noise. Cars moved slowly, horns echoed, and people walked fast with their eyes fixed on their phones or the road ahead. It was the kind of place where everyone had somewhere to be and no time to stop. Near the edge of the walkway, close to a wall marked by old posters and faded paint, a young woman sat quietly on the ground. In front of her was a small, open cloth with a few coins resting inside. Next to it was her instrument, resting gently against her leg, as if it were part of her body. She had arrived early, before the crowd became thick. She liked the quiet moments before the rush, when the city still felt human. She watched the sky change color as the sun climbed higher. These were the moments when she could breathe without feeling judged. Her clothes were clean but worn, showing signs of careful use over a long time. Nothing about her stood out, and that was exactly why most people never noticed her. As the streets slowly filled, footsteps passed close to her. Some people glanced down for a second and quickly looked away. Others walked by without even seeing her. A few stared openly, their faces showing pity, discomfort, or mild irritation. To them, she was just another person asking for help. Another face in a city full of stories no one had time to hear. She adjusted her grip on the instrument, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers. This was not something she picked up recently. It was something that had been with her through many chapters of her life. Long before she sat on this cold ground, music had been her safe place. It was where she ran when words failed her. Even now, when life had stripped her of many things, music stayed. She took a slow breath and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not to perform, not to impress, but to center herself. Playing in public was never easy. Every note carried risk. People could mock her, ignore her, or assume things about her life that were far from true. But staying silent felt worse. Silence made her invisible, and she had already spent too much of her life feeling unseen. The first few notes were soft. They barely rose above the noise of traffic and chatter. Her hands moved carefully, almost shyly, as if testing whether the space would allow her to exist. A man walking past frowned slightly, thinking it was just another weak attempt to earn spare change. A woman nearby sighed and stepped around her, annoyed by the interruption to her morning. She noticed all of it. She always did. She had learned to read faces quickly. She knew the look of someone who pitied her, the look of someone who felt annoyed, and the look of someone who assumed she lacked skills simply because she sat on the street. These looks used to hurt more than hunger ever did. Over time, she learned to carry them quietly. As she continued to play, memories stirred inside her. Not clear images, but feelings. The feeling of sitting in a small room years ago, practicing late into the night. The feeling of being told she had potential. The feeling of believing, even for a short while, that her future was secure. Life had taken a different path, one filled with sudden turns and hard lessons. Some choices were forced. Some were mistakes. All of them led her here. The street grew louder as the day moved on. More people passed. Some dropped a coin without stopping. It wasn't charity that hurt her pride. It was the way people did it without looking at her face, as if she were part of the pavement, as if she were something to step around, not someone to acknowledge. Her shoulders tensed, but her hands kept moving. She reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't begging. She was offering something real. Music was the only thing she could give without losing herself. Every note came from a place deeper than survival. It came from memory, discipline, and quiet strength. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly. One of them glanced at her and smirked. Another whispered something, and they laughed again. She heard it, even though they didn't mean for her to. Moments like these tested her the most. Not because of the words, but because they reminded her how quickly people judge when they don't understand. Still, she played on. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, finding a rhythm that felt natural. The melody was simple at first, almost ordinary. Anyone listening casually might think it was nothing special. That was fine. She wasn't ready yet. She was warming up, both the instrument and her courage. Nearby, a man selling snacks watched her from a distance. He had seen many performers come and go. Most stayed for a few minutes before giving up. He expected the same from her, To him, she looked tired, like someone who would soon pack up and leave. He turned his attention back to his cart. The woman shifted her position slightly to ease the strain in her back. The ground was cold, and sitting for long periods was never comfortable. But discomfort had become familiar. It no longer scared her. What scared her was the idea of giving up on the one thing that still made her feel whole. She looked up briefly and scanned the crowd. Faces moved past like a stream. Everyone carried their own worries, their own destinations. She wondered how many of them once had dreams they no longer talked about. How many had talents hidden beneath routine and responsibility? The thought made her feel less alone. Her playing grew steadier. The notes started to connect more smoothly, forming a path instead of scattered sounds. A woman walking by slowed down for a second, surprised by the clarity of the tune. She hesitated, then kept walking, unsure why she felt pulled to stop. The performer noticed this too. Small reactions like that gave her quiet strength. They were signs that someone, somewhere, was listening. Even if they didn't stop, even if they didn't give money. Listening was enough. A bus pulled up nearby, releasing a rush of people and noise. For a moment, her music was almost completely drowned out. She waited, adjusted, and continued without frustration. Years of practice had taught her patience. Music didn't need perfect conditions. It only needed honesty. As the crowd settled again, her melody floated more clearly. It carried emotion without forcing it. There was sadness in it, yes, but also resilience. It was the sound of someone who had been broken and learned how to stand again. Quietly, without applause, she felt something shift inside her. A calm focus replaced the earlier tension. The street no longer felt hostile. It felt like a stage she had earned the right to stand on, even if no one else believed it yet. Coins still rested in the cloth. Not many, but enough to show she wasn't invisible. She wasn't playing for the coins alone, though she needed them. She was playing to remind herself that she still mattered, that her story wasn't over. People continued to pass, unaware that they were moments away from witnessing something unexpected. For now, they only saw a woman on the ground playing for a handout. They had no idea what was coming next, and neither did they realize how wrong their assumptions were about to be. The crowd had grown slightly, people moving past her at a steady pace. Most paid no attention, eyes fixed ahead, lost in their own worlds. Some glanced, noticed the worn cloth and the small coins, and quickly looked away, uneasy with the sight. Others whispered among themselves, commenting on her appearance, her position, the instrument she held. Judgments were easy to make when someone's story remained a mystery. She continued to play, her fingers moving carefully, not rushed, not hesitant. Each note told a piece of her story, even if no one listening understood it. The melody was simple, yet there was depth in it. It carried echoes of long nights spent practicing alone, dreams nurtured quietly, and moments of hope that had slipped through her fingers. Music had always been her companion, more faithful than people, more understanding than circumstances. She remembered a time when her life had been different. There had been small rooms with warm light, a teacher who believed in her talent, the constant encouragement of a family that never let her feel unwanted. She remembered holding her instrument with pride, playing songs that filled the space with laughter and wonder. Those memories seemed distant now, like faint images behind a fogged glass. But they reminded her of who she had been and who she could still become. Her mind wandered as she played, thinking about the moments that had led her here. Life had not been kind, and some choices had been forced upon her. She had known hunger, the sharp ache of cold nights, the loneliness of streets that never stopped moving. She had felt invisible more times than she could count. Yet the music had stayed, unwavering and forgiving. Even when no one else believed in her, the music had never doubted her. Occasionally, she caught the eyes of passersby, and sometimes, just for a second, she saw recognition or curiosity there. A businessman walking quickly past paused briefly, a slight frown of concentration on his face. A young mother with a child glanced down, the child pointing at her with innocent fascination. These fleeting moments offered tiny sparks of hope, hints that perhaps someone might understand, even if only for a heartbeat. not everyone was kind. A group of teenagers laughed loudly as they passed, one nudging the other and making remarks. Their voices were sharp, dismissive, mocking. She felt the sting of their words, though she tried not to show it. She had learned long ago that anger or tears were luxuries she could not afford in public spaces. Instead, she focused on the music, letting it absorb her feelings, channeling the hurt into something that could move people without saying a word. Her melody grew richer, her fingers more confident, though still cautious. She allowed herself to play a few complicated phrases, testing the limits of both her skill and the patience of the crowd. Some listeners noticed, a few stopping to give a brief, polite nod. Most remained oblivious, too caught up in their own routines to appreciate the subtleties. But she played anyway. Music was not about recognition. She reminded herself it was about expression, about keeping a part of herself alive in a world that often ignored her existence. A man selling newspapers glanced at her, muttering under his breath about how many people just wanted money without giving anything back. He had seen countless performers, most of whom left quickly, defeated. He did not expect her to last long. Yet she continued, her determination silent but powerful. Her playing was not for survival alone. It was a declaration, quiet but unwavering, that she still had something to offer. The hours passed slowly. The sun rose higher, casting sharp shadows across the street. People's reactions shifted as the day moved on. Some who initially ignored her now gave a sideways glance, curiosity mixed with doubt. A few coins were dropped, not with interest, but out of mild obligation or guilt. She counted nothing, collected nothing yet. The money was not the point. It was the acknowledgement, the simple act of noticing that reminded her she existed, that she mattered. Memories continued to intrude. She remembered her teacher's gentle corrections, the way he would smile when she played a piece correctly, the pride in her own eyes when she accomplished something difficult. She remembered her family cheering for her, the small awards and certificates that once felt so important. Now, those things were gone, but the feelings remained, tucked carefully inside her heart. They fueled her resilience, reminding her that the woman playing on the street was the same woman who had once dreamed, and still could. Some people whispered among themselves, speculating about her life. They assumed hardship, laziness, or failure. They had no idea of the journey that had brought her here, the struggles she had endured silently. Their judgments were heavy, but she carried them lightly. She could not control what others thought, only how she responded. And her response was music. Pure, unguarded, and sincere. The sound of a bus approached, blurring the edges of her melody. She waited patiently, allowing the noise to pass before continuing, adjusting her tempo so that the next notes were clear and precise. Patience had been a lesson she learned early. Life had taught her that nothing worthwhile came instantly. Every day was a test of endurance. Every note a small act of persistence. A few people slowed, drawn in by the unexpected quality of the music. A man with a briefcase stopped, listening with a thoughtful expression. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though recognizing something familiar in the sound. A young woman walking with her dog lingered for a few seconds, tilting her head, captivated by the melody. These small moments of connection were precious, though fleeting. She could feel herself becoming absorbed in the music. Playing was no longer just an act of survival. It became a dialogue. Each note carried a question, an answer, a feeling. She played for herself, yes, but also for anyone who might listen, for anyone willing to notice the beauty in something unexpected. It was a quiet rebellion against invisibility, a way to assert her existence without raising her voice. Hours slipped by. The rhythm of the street became a background hum, a pulse that she matched in her music. She did not hurry. She did not falter. Every motion, every movement of her fingers was deliberate. She was crafting something unseen, a connection between herself and the world around her. Even if no one stopped, even if no one acknowledged her. She played with integrity, with honesty, with heart. At times her thoughts drifted to the future. She wondered if this street, these people, would ever recognize her talent. She wondered if life had more in store, if one day someone would listen, not just briefly but truly. The thought was fragile, easily crushed, but she held on to it like a thread of light in the darkness. It was hope, quiet and steadfast. She adjusted her posture slightly, stretching her back, allowing herself a small sigh of relief. Her body ached from hours of sitting, but the music carried her beyond the pain. Pain was transient. Music was enduring. In the melody she found strength she did not know she had. Strength to face judgment, strength to face indifference, strength to remain visible in a world that often preferred to ignore her. As the day continued, she noticed small signs of recognition. A passerby tapped their foot in time with the music. Another paused, seemingly caught by the rhythm, eyes fixed on her face for just a moment. A child reached into a parent's hand, pointing at the instrument with fascination. These small acknowledgments, quiet and brief, reminded her that human connection was possible. Even amidst the noise and rush of the city, she allowed herself a small smile. Though it was not directed at anyone in particular, it was a smile for herself, for surviving this long, for continuing to play, despite everything. Each note was a declaration. She was still here, still capable, still worthy. And though most people would never know the story behind the music, that did not diminish its value. The act itself was enough. Her playing became more fluid now, the melody weaving in and out of the ambient sounds of the city. She felt a quiet energy building, an understanding that this moment, small as it was, mattered. She did not know what would happen next, did not know if anyone would stop or recognize her, but she played with commitment. Her life had been full of unexpected turns. Perhaps this would be another. The crowd around her remained largely indifferent, but she no longer noticed the dismissive looks or the hurried glances. She was lost in the music, and in doing so, she created a space where judgment could not reach her. The melody carried her forward, beyond hunger, beyond fatigue, beyond the fleeting cruelty of strangers. It was a space of her own making, a sanctuary in the midst of chaos. Hours more passed, and the sun climbed higher, casting bright patches on the worn pavement. She continued to play, not seeking approval, not expecting miracles, simply existing in the moment. Every note was deliberate, a small act of defiance against a world that often overlooked the quiet, the hidden, the underestimated. She played because she had to, because it was the one thing left that truly belonged to her. As the morning turned toward afternoon, she felt a subtle shift. Small movements in the crowd, fleeting gestures of acknowledgement, and a growing curiosity in some faces reminded her that people were beginning to notice. Not everyone, not yet, but enough to give her hope. Enough to suggest that the world, even in its indifference, could recognize a moment of beauty when it appeared unexpectedly. And that was enough to keep her playing. The street around her seemed to shift without warning. What had been a blur of indifferent faces and hurried footsteps was now subtly different. People started noticing her in small ways that mattered more than coins or polite nods. A few had slowed, caught by the rhythm and the emotion of her playing. A man with a briefcase lingered longer than he had intended, and a woman holding a small child unconsciously matched her steps to the tempo of the melody. Each note she played seemed to ripple outward, changing the space without force. Quietly, but powerfully, she had reached a point where the music felt effortless, though her hands worked diligently. Her body swayed gently to the sound, her focus deep, as if the world had narrowed to the strings under her fingers and the tune that carried through the air. The melody was no longer simple. It had grown layered with emotion, with the subtle sorrow and hope that had accumulated in her life. It told a story beyond words, a story of struggle, endurance, and quiet courage. Some passers-by were puzzled. They paused, eyebrows furrowed, unsure why they had stopped in front of a woman who appeared to be playing for spare change. A businessman glanced at his watch, then looked back again, drawn in despite himself. The mother with her child had stopped completely, letting the child stand on tiptoe to see the instrument. Even the teenagers who had mocked her earlier lingered, a little hesitant now, their previous laughter fading as curiosity and wonder took its place. Her mind stayed rooted in the music, but her senses caught every reaction. She could feel the shift in energy around her, subtle but unmistakable. For years, she had learned to read the room, to gauge attention, to sense judgment. Now, she sensed awe. It was not loud or demanding. It was quiet, tentative, like the first glimpse of sunlight through heavy clouds. And in that awe, she found a strange reassurance that her talent, once doubted, could still command respect. As she continued to play, memories of her earlier life resurfaced, vivid and almost tangible. She remembered late nights in a small room, practicing when the world slept. The notes echoing softly against walls that were kind and warm. She remembered the small victories, the smiles, the gentle encouragement from a teacher who had believed she could rise above her circumstances. Life had shifted, circumstances had changed, yet the music remained a constant, a thread connecting who she was to who she had become. The melody began to build, becoming more expressive, carrying her voice into the space around her. She played not for recognition, not for coins, but for the pure act of creation, for the need to remind herself and the world that she still existed and still mattered. Each note was deliberate, precise, yet filled with vulnerability. She was telling her story without words, allowing those who listened to interpret it in their own way, yet inevitably, the truth of her skill and her soul shone through. A few people pulled out their phones, hesitating before recording, uncertain if they should. Unsure if this moment was meant to be captured or simply experienced. The teenager group who had laughed earlier now stood silently at the edge of the crowd, their earlier bravado replaced by a tentative respect. Even the man who had once muttered complaints to himself about street performers paused, clearly reevaluating his assumptions. These small moments, these tiny recognitions, mattered more to her than applause or money ever could. She adjusted her posture slightly, feeling the strain in her back but ignoring it, immersed entirely in the music. She allowed herself to play faster, to incorporate complex harmonies that required her full attention and skill. Each movement was a choice, each note a statement. She had trained for years for moments like this. Even if she had never imagined it would happen on a street corner with indifferent strangers passing by as the melody flowed. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not with expectation, but with awareness. She saw people reacting in ways that surprised her. A young man who had been rushing to work now stood still, mouth slightly open, visibly moved. A woman, weary from the daily grind, paused and placed a small coin in her hand without taking her eyes off the performer. Even a dog tethered to its owner seemed to respond, its tail wagging gently, ears tilting toward the sound. Every small reaction was a thread weaving her into the fabric of this moment, affirming that she was no longer invisible. The melody shifted again. Softer now, introspective, yet still carrying a depth that made people stop and breathe. She thought of her struggles, the nights of hunger, of rejection, of being dismissed by a world that refused to see her worth. All of it was channeled into the music, not as a complaint, but as a testament to resilience. Every chord was a statement. She had survived, and she could still create beauty, even from hardship. She noticed a subtle change in the crowd's energy. Conversations had slowed or stopped entirely. Footsteps became hesitant, as if people were afraid to break the spell of her performance. The air felt different, charged with quiet tension and unexpected admiration. This was the turning point she had been waiting for, though she did not know it yet. The skepticism that had surrounded her for hours was giving way to something more human, recognition, respect, and awe. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, fingers dancing across the instrument, guided by years of practice and innate talent. She felt the music reaching beyond herself, touching the lives of strangers who had initially dismissed her. There was power in this realization, not arrogance, but quiet satisfaction. She had always known she was capable, and now, finally, the world could see it too. Even if only in fleeting glances and stunned expressions, she allowed the music to soar. Notes cascading like water, flowing over the uneven surface of the street, filling the space with something unexpected. It was more than sound. It was a story, a declaration, a revelation. People stopped entirely now, forming an unspoken circle, their faces a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and silent admiration. Even those who had mocked her earlier could not deny the truth in what they were witnessing. time seemed to stretch. The city's rush faded into the background, leaving only the melody and the performer at its heart. She was no longer just a woman playing for a handout. She had become a focal point, a moment of beauty that demanded attention. Each note carried her past, her struggles, her hope, and her unwavering determination. She played with vulnerability and strength intertwined, allowing every emotion to flow freely. The longer she played, the more the crowd's demeanor shifted. People who had been impatient now listened intently. Children tilted their heads, trying to understand the sound. Adults exchanged glances, realizing they had underestimated her. Coins were dropped, small at first, then larger, but it was not about money anymore. It was about acknowledgement, the unspoken recognition of her talent, her presence, and her courage. Her body ached, but she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed by the music and the connection it had created. She thought of the long hours she had spent practicing, the nights of solitude, the moments when hope seemed impossible. All of it had led to this instant where her perseverance met recognition, fleeting yet powerful. She realized that no amount of dismissal or indifference could take away what she carried inside her. And now, the world could see a glimpse of it. The street was alive with the sound, and for the first time that day, she felt seen not as a person asking for help, but as an artist. Her talent, long underestimated, had commanded the space around her, transforming the ordinary street corner into something extraordinary. She played with renewed energy, letting every note, every chord, every pause speak louder than words ever could. As the performance continued, noticed tears in the eyes of some listeners. Not sorrow exactly, but the recognition of something pure, something genuine, something that defied expectations. Even the teenagers, once loud and mocking, stood quietly, absorbing the moment, their earlier judgments dissolving in the face of undeniable skill and expression. The energy of the crowd shifted completely, from indifference and ridicule to respect and awe. She paused for a brief moment, just to breathe, and the silence was remarkable. The city noise seemed distant now, the world temporarily hushed by the power of her music. People waited, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to hear more. Every handout, every coin in her cloth now felt secondary. The real gift was being given freely, unasked for, and yet deeply felt, the gift of her talent, her story, and her humanity. The music had reached a point where it was impossible for anyone nearby to ignore it. The melody flowed effortlessly, carrying emotion that spoke louder than any words ever could. People stopped completely, some leaning slightly forward, as though to catch every note before it disappeared. The teenagers who had laughed earlier were now standing quietly, their previous mockery replaced with astonishment and a kind of reverence they did not expect to feel. The street that had seemed indifferent a few hours ago now felt alive. Charged with the weight of what was unfolding, the performer felt the change in energy. It was subtle, but undeniable. Her music had begun to affect people, to pull them out of their routines, to make them see what they had overlooked. She had expected indifference, perhaps polite acknowledgement at best, but she had not expected awe. It was not just admiration for skill. It was recognition of her presence, of the struggle behind every note, of the life she had poured into her talent despite hardship. Her fingers moved with precision, each movement deliberate yet fluid, as if the instrument were an extension of herself. She allowed the music to become more expressive, layering it with nuances she had developed over years of practice. The melody carried joy, sorrow, longing, and hope, all woven together seamlessly. Those who had once judged her quickly now paused. Captivated by the depth and power of her performance, a small crowd had gathered, forming a loose circle around her. Some were standing, some leaning on nearby walls, and a few had sat on the pavement, unable to resist the pull of the music. Their faces were full of astonishment, some with tears glistening in their eyes. They whispered quietly among themselves, trying not to break the spell, yet eager to share the beauty they were witnessing. She noticed these reactions but did not allow them to distract her. She was focused entirely on the music. On each note, and the story it carried, the woman playing on the street was no longer invisible. She had become the center of attention without demanding it. Every strum, every chord resonated with authenticity and vulnerability. She played with all her heart, knowing that this moment, was a culmination of years of perseverance, of nights spent practicing alone, of times when she had felt unseen and unheard. Now the world was listening. Even if only for a brief moment. Coins had started to accumulate in the small cloth in front of her, but she hardly noticed. Money had never been her goal. It was simply a byproduct of her presence, a sign that people were beginning to recognize the value of what she had to offer. She played for herself, for the music, and for the quiet hope that someone might understand the story behind her notes. That hope was slowly becoming reality. Among the crowd, a man paused with his briefcase at his side. He had been rushing to an appointment, but the sound of her music had made him stop. He had expected simple, street-level performance, perhaps a weak attempt at playing for money, but what he heard was extraordinary. He looked around, noticing the reactions of others, the way the street seemed to transform under the weight of her talent. His eyes widened, and he remained there, rooted in place, taking in every note. Nearby, a mother held her child close, letting the little one watch the performance with fascination. The child pointed excitedly, tugging at the mother's sleeve, clearly moved by the music, even without understanding it. The mother smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of the raw beauty before her, and she let herself be carried by the melody, feeling a deep, unspoken connection to the performer. The teenagers who had once mocked her now looked ashamed, their expressions softening as they listened with a newfound respect. Their laughter was gone, replaced by silent attention and contemplation. They shifted on their feet, unsure how to process what they had dismissed so easily before. In this brief encounter, they were learning a lesson about assumptions, about the danger of judging someone without knowing their story, and about the power of genuine talent. Her music told a story of endurance. It spoke of nights of struggle, of days when she had wondered if anyone would ever notice her, of moments when she felt small and invisible. Yet it also carried the story of resilience, of the inner strength that allowed her to keep going, to keep practicing, and to keep believing in herself, even when the world did not. Every chord, every note was imbued with that life experience, making the performance more than entertainment. It became a lesson in courage and determination. The street itself seemed to transform around her. The usual noise of traffic, conversations, and footsteps faded into a backdrop, a gentle hum beneath her melody. People were no longer rushing. They had paused, caught in the moment, captivated by the unexpected beauty that had appeared in the midst of their routine day. The city, for a moment, had become a space of reflection and awe, all because of one woman and her instrument. She noticed the subtle gestures from the crowd, the way people leaned in, the careful steps that kept them closer to the music, the way some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. These moments, though small, were significant. They showed that her music had reached them, had touched something deep within. It was the kind of recognition she had longed for, the kind that could not be faked or demanded, only earned through authenticity and skill. Her hands moved with confidence, dancing across the strings. Her posture steady, despite the hours she had spent sitting on the hard ground. The melody evolved, rising and falling with emotion, each note carefully chosen to convey meaning. The crowd responded instinctively, some swaying gently, others holding their breath, all caught in the spell of her music. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent now found themselves fully present. Unable to look away, she allowed herself a small smile as she noticed the reactions around her. It was not a smile for the crowd but for herself, a quiet acknowledgement of her own perseverance and the journey that had brought her here. She had survived difficult times, faced rejection and indifference, yet she had never abandoned her music. And now, at last, her talent was being seen and felt by others. Validating the years of dedication and struggle, the melody shifted again, becoming more intricate, more expressive, carrying a combination of sorrow and joy. Reflecting the complexities of her own life, each note was deliberate, each chord a reflection of her experience. The audience, captivated by the emotional depth of the performance, listened intently, some closing their eyes, others exchanging glances of amazement. The music had created a shared experience, connecting strangers through a common unspoken understanding. A few people dropped coins into the cloth in front of her, but she hardly noticed the accumulation. Her focus remained on the music, on the act of creating and sharing something real. The presence of the crowd, their silent acknowledgement, and their awe were more important than any material reward. This was her moment, a testament to her talent and her persistence. A fleeting but unforgettable connection with those who had stopped to listen. Even the man who had been rushing to an appointment earlier had forgotten the time, his mind fully immersed in the performance. He glanced at his watch occasionally but remained rooted in place, unable to leave the beauty he was witnessing. The music had captured not just his attention but his respect, and he found himself silently admiring the courage and skill of the woman playing on the street. The mother and child nearby remained captivated by the performance. The child pointed and clapped softly, delighted by the sounds, while the mother watched with quiet emotion. The simple act of sharing this moment had created a bond between performer and audience, a reminder of the power of art to connect people across different ages, experiences, and backgrounds. Her music became more expressive with each passing minute, incorporating subtle variations and harmonies that revealed her depth of skill. The crowd responded instinctively, drawn in by the richness and authenticity of the sound. Each note was a testament to her resilience, a reflection of the years of practice, perseverance, and belief that had brought her to this point. It was no longer just a performance. It was a revelation. The street, once indifferent and rushed, now seemed transformed. People were still attentive and emotionally engaged. They whispered to each other softly, trying not to disturb the spell, yet eager to share the beauty they were witnessing. The performer had created a space of connection, a moment where her music transcended the ordinary, leaving an indelible mark on those who had taken the time to listen. As the performance continued, she felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that came not from recognition or reward, but from the act of creating something meaningful and sharing it with others. She had played for herself, for the music, and for the hope that someone would notice. And now the world around her had paused, listening, acknowledging, and feeling the power of her talent. In that moment, she was no longer invisible. She was seen, heard, and admired, even if only for a fleeting but unforgettable time. The music had carried on for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was only a portion of the day. People around her had become completely still, caught in the spell of the melody, unable to tear themselves away. Even the usual hum of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the depth and resonance of the performance. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the instrument, each note precise, yet full of feeling. Every chord she played carried the weight of her life, her struggle, her determination, and her hope. For the first time that day, she noticed the coins in the cloth in front of her. They were more than she had expected, and she realized it was not the money she valued, but the acknowledgement behind it. People were finally seeing her, not just as someone asking for help, but as someone worthy of attention, respect, and admiration. That realization gave her a sense of quiet satisfaction, a warmth that spread from her chest and settled in her heart. Some people had stepped closer, hesitant at first, unsure if they should intrude on the intimate space created by the music. Others had pulled out their phones, recording or taking pictures, wanting to remember this unexpected moment of beauty. There was no pushing, no crowding, only a collective pause that allowed everyone to experience the performance fully. It was rare, she knew, for something so simple to have such a profound effect, and she felt grateful for it. The woman playing on the street had reached the peak of her performance, the melody soaring, then softening, then rising again. Her hands moved with a natural fluidity, guided by years of practice and the inner strength that had carried her through difficult times. She was no longer aware of the observers, the coins, or even the time. There was only the music, the story it told, and the connection it forged between her and those who listened. The mother with her child leaned in, allowing the child to touch the instrument gently. Feeling the vibrations beneath their fingertips, the father of a young boy nearby whispered to his son about the talent in front of them, and the boy's eyes widened with wonder. A man who had initially walked past without noticing now stood still, a soft smile forming on his lips as he listened to the layers of emotion and skill. Every face in the crowd reflected a mixture of surprise, admiration, and respect. She allowed herself to remember the long nights of practice, the times she had doubted herself, the moments when she had wondered if her talent would ever be recognized. Those memories fueled her playing, giving each note a deeper significance. She was not performing for applause or money, though both were welcome. She was performing to reclaim her sense of self, to assert that she still had something valuable to offer, and to remind herself that her journey had meaning. The energy of the crowd grew. Small conversations were replaced by silent attention, heads tilting slightly, eyes widening, and occasional gasps escaping as the music touched something deep within. The teenagers who had mocked her earlier were no longer standing at the edges, unsure of what to think. They were absorbed, their earlier arrogance replaced by awe and contemplation. They had learned something unexpected about talent, resilience, and the dangers of assumptions. Her melody began to descend into a softer, more reflective tone. It was as though she were telling the audience that her story was not only one of struggle, but also of hope and endurance. The softer notes carried a vulnerability that contrasted beautifully with the strength and skill. Displayed in the earlier parts of her performance, people felt it. They sensed the story behind each note, the layers of emotion embedded in the music, and the years of effort that had led her here. Some listeners reached for coins, placing them in the cloth with a newfound respect, no longer out of obligation, but as a gesture of appreciation. Others simply stood, letting the music wash over them, experiencing the connection without any need for material expression. The woman playing on the street noticed the shift, but she remained focused on the music. This was not about reward. It was about recognition. It's about the validation that comes from being truly seen. Her hands moved with a gentle intensity, every chord deliberate, yet natural. She allowed herself to smile faintly as she noticed the subtle gestures from the crowd, the way someone tilted their head, closed their eyes, or leaned slightly forward. Each reaction reinforced the connection between performer and audience, creating an invisible thread that tied them together in a shared moment of appreciation. It was fleeting, yet profound, and it filled her with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The melody shifted once more, rising in a crescendo that was both powerful and moving. She poured all her emotion into the music, letting it flow through her and out into the world. The crowd responded instinctively, some taking a step closer, others letting their breath catch in their throats, all captivated by the authenticity and beauty of the performance. In those moments, the street had become more than a place of transit. It had become a space of connection, understanding, shared humanity. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend about the skill she was witnessing, and the friend nodded, eyes wide with disbelief. A man paused, realizing he had underestimated the performer, and silently apologized to himself for his earlier judgment. Even the teenagers exchanged glances, their previous mockery replaced by admiration and newfound respect. In that instant, the performer had transformed not just the street corner, but the perceptions and attitudes of everyone present. She noticed a few people wiping away tears, moved by the unexpected depth of her performance. Others clapped softly, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence as the reality of her talent sank in. The energy of the crowd had shifted completely. What had begun as indifference and skepticism had turned into awe and genuine appreciation. She had expected little, yet she had received so much more. Not in coins or applause alone, but in the acknowledgement of her skill and the recognition of her presence. Her fingers continued to dance over the strings, moving with a natural grace that made the music seem effortless. The melody softened once more, gently winding down, yet retaining a quiet power that lingered in the air. People listened, reluctant to break the spell, their attention fully absorbed by the performance. The woman playing on the street felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared something meaningful, something that touched the hearts of those who had taken the time to listen. As she reached the final notes, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to let the silence that followed resonate. The city around her slowly returned, the hum of traffic and conversations creeping back into awareness. But the impression of her music remained etched into the minds and hearts of those who had witnessed it. The applause that followed was spontaneous, sincere, and heartfelt, a reflection of the impact she had made on everyone present. She stood quietly, taking in the reactions, smiling softly at the expressions of admiration and gratitude around her. This was more than she had hoped for, more than she had imagined possible. The coins in the cloth, though appreciated, were secondary to the acknowledgement, the recognition of her talent, and the affirmation of her journey. In that moment, she was not just a street performer. She was an artist, seen, heard, and valued.